was to go to Washington, and she spoke to the US Congress. And it was her wake-up speech, the one where she begins, I've come to America, which is for many people a dream, but this is not the time for dreaming, we have to wake up and do something. And it ends with, we must take action. We must do the impossible because giving up can never ever be an option. So I look at that and I think, she mentions impossible, she doesn't always do that. She doesn't say how you do the impossible, but then I think, well, that's maybe where I can come in. She can carry on doing the evangelizing while I then explain exactly how you do it, because this is something that has always fascinated me for a number of reasons, discovering that there is a problem with defining things as impossible, there is a problem with asking if things are possible, and there is a better way. And one of the moments where this suddenly became very clear to me was when I was living in France and I was doing innovation workshops. And I was hired by a local company to do one of these workshops where you teach their employees how to be more innovative. Now I think what happens is that you have a company, a corporate, a small one, medium-sized maybe, they are going along and they have a cash cow, everything's steady, but then maybe one of the C-level managers either goes to business school or they read Harvard Business Review and they read the page where it says that a company that is more creative, more innovative, will be more profitable. So they think, okay, we will have to pay to have our people made more innovative. So they hire somebody like me. We go off-site, in this case, very off-site, to the top of a mountain, to a little hotel that looked like Adolf Hitler's holiday home, that kind of thing. And my job was to, for 2 days, work these people through a lot of exercises so that they would come up with innovative new ideas. Now you're probably familiar with some of these exercises. They're actually very easy to do. It's a bit like those circus strongmen who used to do tricks like the guy would lie on the ground, he'd have 2 big assistants bring a huge stone and put it on his stomach, then another big guy would come with a hammer and smash the stone and it would break and everybody would go, wow, that's so amazing. It's actually very easy. Anybody can do that because the stone absorbs the energy. And people are often amazed when you take their ordinary people and make them innovative, but actually it's not that hard. There's a lot of simple exercises you might have done in school of the kind like where you choose cards with words on, and you may get cheese and bicycle, and you have to come up with an idea that combines the two. There are some more interesting exercises which are more suitable for maybe entrepreneurs, and you get in more advanced courses. Like, for example, Tina Seelig from, I think, Stanford, has a very interesting technique where she thinks that coming up with bad ideas is a lot easier than good ideas. So what she does is she says, okay, come up with a lot of bad ideas and then just turn them upside down. In 2015, she was here in Stockholm at Esbury doing a workshop about this, and you can actually, on their website, you can watch the video where she demonstrates this technique. And if you look carefully in the second half, I'm there as well on stage. I was part of the audience in that case. But then there's another one, which the first time I saw it, I thought, this will never work. I thought, no, people will laugh at me when I do this, but they don't, because it does work. And it's very simple. You choose, maybe for your product, your business, your application, you choose some key metrics. And then you ask yourself, what if I could improve them by an order of magnitude, or more? So I took these people up into the mountains and they made a product, I can't tell more because of NDAs, they make a product which is used in manufacturing. And I said, okay, how much does your product cost? And they said, about 100,000 euros, it's about 1 million kroner. So I said, okay, make it for 10,000. So immediately they go, impossible, cannot be done. And then they just fold their arms and think, that's it, we're done now. And I go, no, I did not ask you if it's possible. I asked you, what do you have to do to make it for 10,000? So we went and looked at the question again, and it was very carefully formulated. The question was, what steps do you have to take? What changes do you have to make? What new technologies do you need? What exactly is it you need to make it for 10,000? So they said, okay, we'll try, but it will not work. And then they tried, and eventually they came back with a proposal. And they said, okay, to make it for 10,000, we have to do this function in software. We have to take away this piece, so it'll be a bit slower. We can't do that, but nobody uses it anyway. In the end, they had a sort of feasible proposal for a thing which is very cheap, but also very slow. And they said, but who would want that? And a voice from the back says, I want it. Now this company, they invited to this meeting the management, the marketers, the salespeople, the developers, the production people, a couple of academics, just for colour, and some representatives of key customers. And it was one of the customers who said, I would use that product. And he said, I would use it in a completely different way. He said, as long as the machines were very expensive, we could afford one, and we had to make it run very fast all the time. He said, as soon as you make them cheap, I can put them all over the place and use them in a totally different way. So he said, yes, that changes the way we think about it. So then, of course, they all look at me and said, okay, you win, it did work. Whether they made the product or not, I'm not sure, but it actually highlights that it's easier to come up with ideas than it is to actually get them into production, because the problem isn't the idea really, it's the execution and getting the management to go behind your business as well. But we solved the innovation problem for them. We demonstrated that anybody can do it. But also we demonstrated the power of asking, what do we need to do? And this gives us our first lesson for today. You shouldn't be asking ever, can you do this? Is it possible? Is it impossible? Because the answer is essentially meaningless. You could come to me with a broken pencil and ask me if I can fix the pencil. And I would say, no, I don't have a pencil sharpener with me. Actually, there is one in the printer room, but pretend I don't know that. So a lot of things, if you ask if it's possible or can you do it, the answer might be, with the present tools and resources, no, but I could easily get the answer. NASA famously never talks about whether they're ready to do something or not, because by their definition, you're not ready to do something until you've done it many times. They have 9 levels of technology readiness, and for them, the Apollo 11 flight was not at the highest level. It was not really a mature technology because they'd only done it once. And as far as they're concerned, if you haven't done a thing many times, you don't know how to do it, by definition. So there's a lot of things where if you ask me, can you do this? The answer is maybe no, but if you said, if I give you a week and this much money, can you do it? And the answer will be yes, which is why you should never ask that question. It's very, very useless because it doesn't get you any valuable information. There's also a lot of cultural baggage associated with that, and it focuses the attention on the difficulties and the impossibility, not on the path. So you should always be looking for what are the paths, what are the routes to solving the problem. And if you think about it, this is actually how big things get done. You imagine if somebody had come to you in 1999 and said, I want to make an app which I'm going to call YouTube, where you can upload videos and download them. And everybody would have said, oh, that will never work with a dial-up modem. And of course it won't. So what do you need to fix that? You need bigger pipes between the various network nodes. You need fast broadband in every home. You need probably better laptops. You need a whole load of things. But once you know you need it, you fix it. And in a lot of large corporates, this is actually normal routine practice. And at higher levels, it happens too. When smartphones were invented, all of the smartphone makers, all of the software makers, all of the phone operators, they all got together and they made a little thing called the Open Mobile Alliance with, I think, 400 members. And they would all go off to Hawaii and agree on some standards so that any phone can send a picture to any other phone. We take this for granted now, but it wasn't before. Somebody actually sat down and said, how do we make this phone useful? And the answer was, we need to fly thousands of people to Hawaii, to Las Vegas, to Singapore, to agree on some standards, and they did, including me. I was there too. So you just have to think big sometimes. And it's not just in technology. Obviously, you need to take this approach if you're going to roll out Google Street View, another impossible task, and a load of other things. But also the same logic applies to social problems. And one of my favourite cases is the story about the abolition of the slave trade, or more specifically, one episode, the law in England of 1807 for the abolition of the slave trade. Now, what happened was that around about the 1790-ish, there was a group of people in London who were determined that they wanted to abolish slavery worldwide, which is pretty much an impossible task. This is about the time sort of like depicted in the TV show Poldark, when everybody was going around with 3-pointed hats and sailing around in pirate ships and everything. But what they did was very interesting, because first of all they said, what should be our goal? And they thought the first goal cannot be just abolish all slavery worldwide, because we have no clear path to getting there, but we do one part goal, which is stopping the trade. And their logic was, if we can stop the slaves getting to the Caribbean, to the North America, South America, then the slave trade will stop and slavery will end. That didn't actually work in the long run, but it was a good idea. But then the question was, how do we make that happen? Now, by a very convenient fact, at that time actually a lot of the slave trade was run using ships from Great Britain, which meant that through the Parliament of the UK it was actually much easier to stop it than any other way. So what they did was they launched an intensive campaign to get a law made to stop the slave trade. Just one English law. The first time they tried it in 1791, it was rejected by about 2/3 of the members of Parliament. But then they just renewed the campaign, and then again in 1807, when they proposed it, it passed by 283 to 16 votes. What happened in the meantime? Well, in the meantime, they ran a textbook influencing campaign. They had everything. They got the will of the people behind them. They organised petitions. They organised letter writing events where they would gather people like here, give everybody a piece of paper and say, write to your MP, write to the Prime Minister. They would organise boycotts of slave products like sugar, so that the people who sold the sugar would realise that there's a problem. And they would lobby anybody in government. And they also campaigned for some changes to the way that the government was run, to take the power out of the lobbies like the West Indies lobby, so there would be less opposition in Parliament to these things. So they did all of these things and did it very well. There was at least 4 ex-slaves who published books using a kind of the 18th century equivalent of Kickstarter, where people subscribed to a book before it was written. You would pay in advance for a book, and they would write it, then you would get your copy with your name inside it. And looking at these books, I've read them all on Google Books now, and what seems clear to me is that behind these books there is the hand of a ghostwriter who was managing this. They also worked on memes and images as well that were very good for propaganda. Like there is a famous illustration showing the deck of a slave ship showing how the slaves were placed, which was actually based on the ship called Brooks, which was an illustration that the campaign commissioned and was very successful. And then they would make things like little medals with the slogan, am I not a man and brother, with a picture of a slave on it and things like that, which they sold everywhere. So they had a very, very organised campaign, and it worked. They were insanely effective at doing that, and they were able to stop it because once they had that law, then what happened was the Royal Navy would send its ships out into the sea. There was a penalty of £100 for every slave found on your ship, which meant they would stop a ship if it had a few hundred slaves on it, which was common. That would be serious damage for the owner. So they would send out the Navy saying, okay, there's going to be a fine of £100 for every slave we find on a ship. There's going to be what they call pirate treatment for the crews of the ships, which doesn't sound very good when you remember that the place they took them in London was a place called Execution Dock, which gives an idea of what the treatment was going to be. And over the few years after that law was made, they stopped 1,600 ships, freed 150,000 slaves, and effectively cut off the slave trade, and then they could focus on their next goal, which was total abolition. So just with simple things like letter writing, petitioning, protesting, memes, images, propaganda, they managed to do a masterful campaign which looks surprisingly modern today. They lack only Facebook and t-shirts. Otherwise, it looks just like something you would do today, which means that there's not a lot of new stuff. And this is actually full of ideas that can inspire people today. But there's another thing that I think is interesting about this, is the way they started with a very, very ambitious, impossible goal: abolish world slavery. Now, it's not like there is a switch somewhere, slavery on, slavery off, and you just have to press the button or flick the switch. To actually do that, you have to break it down into smaller pieces. One smaller piece was we stop the trade, the shipping of slaves across the Atlantic. How do we do that? We get the law. How do we get the law? Lobbying. How do we lobby? We first of all have to get the support of the people, so we need propaganda, we need books, we need flyers, and then we have to get the people committed to it, so we make them sign a petition. This is classic psychology. You get somebody to sign a petition and they feel committed to the issue, and then one day you say, will you write a letter? And they go, sure, and they write a letter to their MP or whatever. So you break down the impossible goal, abolish all slavery in the world, and you're down at the level of write a letter, which anybody can do. So you have to break down your thing into smaller pieces. Keep drilling down until you get to the level where no further analysis is needed. You just do the thing. And I use actually this technique all the time. I have an impossible thing to do, either for me or maybe for one of the people I mentor. And I say, okay, let's break it down to the point where you have in your action plan for today, not something nebulous like bring world peace or abolish slavery, things for which there is no big lever or switch, but things like send an email to X to say Y because Z. And then you just work through your list, you just do it systematically. So this is our second learning for today, which is that you cascade your goal down to levels where you can actually take a direct action. When you think about it, this is obvious, but I see a lot of people who put on their to-do list things like learn to fly. That is not something you can just do. I mean, I actually did that once and it didn't work. What you have to do is you break it down to things like visit flying club, fill in form, get picture taken, go visit their doctors or whatever. You break it down into the pieces and you do those pieces. You just put them in a list and then you get them done. And you can solve pretty much any problem if you have the right goals and the right strategy and the right organization. You can even do things like ending the Atlantic slave trade by writing a letter, which is pretty awesome when you think about it, because we have a lot of other slavery scale problems to face, and when you realize that they were able to do that with very, very little resources, and that's very impressive. So, how does this work with the cascading down? There's another example. This time we go back to industry, but a little bit back in the past, to find an example where I am peripherally involved in one way, though I didn't actually build it myself, and that's the Transcontinental Railroad. Now, back in 1862, if you wanted to go from the east coast of America to the west coast, there were two choices, both horrible. Choice one was to go across overland in a wagon, and you would probably die. It took 6 months, $1,000, and it was a very high risk. The other was to sail down to Panama, cross the land there because there was no canal yet, and then take a boat up to San Francisco on the other side. Again, 6 months, $1,000, chance of dying pretty high. So there was a lot of motivation to build a railroad, but there wasn't anybody building it. And suddenly it happened. Between 1863 and 1869, two railroads, one starting from Sacramento in California, one starting from Omaha in Nebraska, which was already connected to the East Coast. They set out together in different directions and eventually met in Utah. Now in the end, they were working at an incredible pace. They were laying like 10 miles of track every day, and they used to make special trains. Each train had all the stuff they needed for 10 miles. That means a wagon with the accommodation for the workers, another car for the food and the kitchen and everything, and then lots of other wagons with rails, ties, all the other things you needed. They'd bring in the train, it would lay 10 miles of track, and then back off, and then they'd bring in the next one and so on. And at the end, to speed work up, they were paying normal salary to the workers just for showing up, double salary for meeting the initial goal, and 4 times the agreed pay rate if they reached the stretchy goal, which of course they did because they like money and there's nothing else to do out there, so they really, really went very fast, and they built this thing at an incredible pace. But you can't just build a railway like that just by saying, let's build a railway. Your first problem is that it's 3,077 kilometers. Now there's 2 rails, so that means 6,000 and something kilometers of steel rail. So what happens? You call the rail vendor and say, I'd like to buy some rails. And they go, how much? And they go, about 6,000 kilometers. And they go, we haven't got that much in stock, we'll have to check with the factory. Then they call the factory and they say, look, we need 6,000 kilometers of steel rail over the next 5 years or so. And they say, we don't have enough rolling mills to make that. So they say, we'll have to build them. So they have to build them. But then when they call the steel suppliers and say, we need enough steel to roll to make 6,000 kilometer rail, they say, we haven't got enough steel. So we have to make another steel mill to make the steel. And then they call the iron ore mines and the coal mines, and they say, our mines are just not big enough, we have to dig more mines. And then of course they come to the other problem, who's going to do all the work? So on the west coast to actually lay the tracks, they looked around and thought, where are we going to find people to actually lay the track? There wasn't anybody. So they sent their headhunters out to China, recruited a lot of Chinese people and brought them to America to lay the tracks. And on the other side, to make the mines go, you can't just take any idiot off the street and send them down a mine. So what they did was they sent their headhunters to Europe, and they knocked on, among other things, the door of my great-great-uncle James Pearson in a little village called Alloa, and said, would you like to come and work in a mine in West Virginia? And he said, yeah, sure thing. And he went. So that's how I helped build the Transcontinental Railroad. So you see how you start at the top, you think we need the railway. Then you think we need the rails, then you think we need the rolling mills, we need the iron ore, we need the mine, we need the miners. And then for the miners as well, they had to build whole towns. So then they needed a lot of wood to make the wooden huts, which meant they needed a lot of lumberjacks. And this whole process of provisioning is actually what happens. It doesn't happen normally in the sort of public light, but if you talk to anybody who works for a very large organization or a government, this is what they're worrying about. They're thinking we're going to need this much stuff in future. Are we going to have the qualified people to do it? Are we going to have the resources to do it? And they're already planning ahead 10, 20, 30 years, making sure this is going to happen. So you need sometimes to think, what do we need to make something happen? And that may mean that you may need to talk to a lot of people. It may mean that you need to go and talk to the guys who supply things, saying, look, would you be able to supply so much stuff at this kind of price? And if we did this, and so you have to figure out the entire landscape, which is actually often more complicated than you think. Who are all the people who are involved in your thing? Are there any bottlenecks? Is it a thing which is only made by one company? Does that company have enough capacity to ramp up? And this is what happens. If you're trying to make a thing like an iPhone, for example, it's not enough just to find the parts. You've got to find the parts and somebody who can make millions of them very, very quickly and reliably. And this is not always easy. So you need to drill down, and you start off with your goal, you break that down into things that you can do, you break that down into smaller things till you get to the level you can do, and then I wonder, just how far down do you go? And then we come down to the level of, should we worry about the very, very small things? Now there is another approach to solving problems, which is one of my favourites for big things, and that's every little bit counts. Like, for example, if the house is a mess, and I think, look, if every time I go to the kitchen I pick up something and throw it in the trash, then eventually everything will be gone. And that actually does work. It takes geologic time, but it does solve problems. And there is a famous classic case which is all based on one way of implementing this every little bit counts works, and that's the slightly controversial but very, very interesting case of the marginal gains. Now the idea here is that one little improvement doesn't help you, but a lot of little improvements can be as good as a big improvement. And this story comes to us from the world of cycling, where there was a guy who thought that instead of trying to make one big effort to make my team the winning team, I will make lots of small efforts which will add up to be a big one. And it comes from the actual genuine concept that if you have a 1% improvement every day, at the end of the year that aggregates to 37% improvement. But what they did was to apply this in a new way. So there's a guy called David Brailsford who was the dangerous combination of being a professional cyclist and a business school alumnus. He'd heard about marginal gains in business school. So what he did was, he thought, I will apply this to my cycling team. To put this in perspective, I was actually born in England, where, when I lived there, cycling was the thing little children did. Bicycles were only for children, there wasn't really any other use. And cycle racing, never heard of it. Then I went to live in Italy for a long time, where the racing of bicycles is almost a religion. In fact, there is even, in the mountains above Lake Como, in a place called Chiavenna, there is actually a church dedicated to racing cyclists, where the walls are covered not with pictures of saints, but bicycles, shirts and everything, and outside is a statue of a guy on a bicycle, and underneath it says, you have to go see this with your own eyes, it says, and then God created the bicycle, and so on. They really worship it, and you're driving along in Italy, and suddenly somebody will step out into the street and stop you, all the cars will pull over to one side, and a pack of cyclists will be racing past, because they worship cycling. In England they don't. And in the 1900s, if I remember right, cyclists from England won exactly one Olympic medal. And they never ever won the Tour de France. I don't know if they even participated. So then comes David Brailsford with his radical new idea. He was thinking, I'm going to change that. And he did. He won lots of medals. He's won the Tour de France at least 3 times. And he's himself got lots of medals. And his logic was, to win, I could maybe take my cyclist and make my cyclist twice as good. but that's difficult. He said, maybe what I could do is go around looking for very small things and improve everything. So he looked around everything that the team did and thought, what can we do to make it slightly better? So he did things like he painted the floor of the workshop white so that it would be kept cleaner, so the bicycles wouldn't get any dust in them. He wouldn't allow his team members to shake hands in case they got colds. He hired a surgeon to teach the cyclists how to wash their hands properly so they wouldn't get colds. He carried mattresses and pillows around for each member of the team so that every cyclist could sleep in their own bed before a race, wherever they were. He would also send a team of people from his team the day before to each hotel to clean the hotel rooms to a deeper standard than the hotel does, so there would be no germs. So he did all of these things, and things like rubbing alcohol on all the tires so they get more grip, and A/B testing different kinds of massage oils so they could see which gave the most effective. So he was doing thousands of little tiny changes. All together they added up to one big improvement, and he won a lot of medals. That at least is the official version. And this was presented in the popular press as this being the miracle of David Brailsford. Marginal gains is a solution to any problem. And people were thinking, my startup has no traction. I will paint the floor of our co-working space white, and I will give heated electric shorts to all my developers, like Brailsford did to the cyclists, so that they can develop better. That's not going to work, is it? And in any business, if you think, initially people think this is awesome, it's brilliant, but then I used to always say, try applying it. And then they would try and realise it doesn't really work for us. And then they would ask, but does it work for him? And then they thought, is it just a cover? And there was dark rumours about doping and things like that. Some people thought it was secretly doping the cyclists and then blaming everything on heated shorts and white floors. But that apparently is not the case. There is a much simpler theory, which when you think about it is obvious. The marginal gains did work, but not in the manner that you expect. It worked because it became like a kind of religious cult. It inspired people, it motivated people. They worked harder, they all pulled in the same direction. And you can imagine that if you've gone back 10 years and you had said to one of the mechanics, clean the floor, and they'd say, why should I clean the floor? I cleaned it last month. But now you can say, clean the floor for marginal gains. And they go, yay, marginal gains. And they would all clean the floor together and then do a little dance and sing the marginal gains song. This was the kind of spirit. And that's probably what is the real cause of the improvement. It's the fact that they had some cause to rally around. They were all inspired, they were all tuned in, they were singing the same song, the marginal gains song. And this is actually very common. There have been, over the years, a number of business school fads which are all give Japanese names like Kaizen or Pokeyoki or Duran Duran, all these things, where basically, if you look at it closely, it's just ordinary good practice with a Japanese name. But if you say to somebody, check the production gauges very carefully because it's good for business, they ignore you. But if you say do it because that's Kaizen, and then they go, yes, let's do the Kaizen thing, and they go and do it, and they do what they should have done anyway, but they're happy to do it because they have learned a new slogan, they have a new name for it, and it's cool, it's a Japanese name. What they do in Japan, I'm not sure, but I guess they do it the other way around. So this having actually something to inspire people is not actually such a bad idea. But then there is another theory though. The other theory comes from the cynical cyclists and the people who've actually been to business school, and they look at this and think, wait a minute, he sends a team of people to go to the hotels the day before to clean the rooms and install each rider's personal mattresses. He gives everybody electric shorts, and the cyclists, the old cyclists, were thinking, but in the 1990s we had to wash our own shirts in the hotel room. We didn't have somebody cleaning the room or giving us heated electric shorts to keep our butts warm. So they were thinking, where is all the money coming from? And then they realised that David Brailsford's dirty secret is probably partly the religion of marginal gains and a lot of money. And you can solve a lot of problems with a lot of money. I strongly suspect as well that in the slavery case, though it's not clearly stated by the people involved, there was a lot of money there as well. Because you look at their Kickstarter style books, they got a lot of people who had been slaves, wrote books about their experience, which are beautiful books. They were beautifully written and typeset. And if you look at the subscribers, these are the people who ordered a copy before it was written. And it's all people like the Duke of Northumberland, He is one of the richest people in the world. Ordinary people who have been slaves and escaped don't hang out with the Duke of Northumberland. There was somebody with serious money involved in this somewhere, and it's the same with Brailsford. He had a lot of money. If you want to win the Tour de France, you can win it by throwing money at it. This is, sadly, a fairly general sort of problem, because if you want to make an atomic bomb, you throw money at the problem. You want to put people on the moon, you throw money at it. All of these big things were done by just insane amounts of expenditure. And I wonder what will happen when Brailsford's money runs out, because eventually it will. And then will he still be able to send teams ahead to clean hotel rooms? Will he still be able to pay a guy whose only job is to rub alcohol on the tyres to make them grip better? Will he still be able to pay massage experts to A/B test different oils? This is all something you can only do when you have a lot of resources. And this is actually, I've been teaching influencing skills in business schools and to companies as well. And one of the things that I often tell people is never underestimate the impact that money makes, because you could do a lot with volunteers, but you could do even more with volunteers and some money. Without money, everything gets exponentially more difficult, which is why fundraising is such a critical thing. It's not always understood, I think, by everybody, but if you want to make things happen, having some cash really helps a lot. And you would never be able to win the Tour de France just by painting the floor white and wearing electric shorts, because you need somebody to pay for these things, and all of these things cost money. But if somebody gives you money, then things are all that easy. You can still lose with money, but it's a lot easier to win if you have the money. So we've seen so far that first of all, you need to stop asking if things are possible or not, but just start asking, okay, what are the things I need to do? What are the pathways we can explore? What are the ways to get there? You need then to break down your goals into smaller pieces until you get down to the level of things you can do, and then you don't paint the floor white and wear electric shorts, but you learn from the Brailsford experiment, and you remember that sometimes you need an inspiring slogan, you need an inspiring brand, you need something that people can coalesce around, and it helps as well if you have some money. These are sort of the big things. Then there's a lot of other things that we're not going to go into tonight because it will take too long. Like, for example, last year there was Damien Gentle at the University of Pennsylvania published some very, very interesting research into how you can shift the norms of society without having a majority of people on your side. Now, common sense would tell you that if there is a certain sort of belief in society and you want to change that you have to be 50% plus one. You don't. In theory, you would need only 10%, but that's never been seen in the wild. Experimentally, what Gentler has demonstrated is that with just 25% of the population in favour of the minority thing, whether it's legalising marijuana, illegalising tobacco, all these things, that's enough to get the whole of society to accept. This is a little bit surprising, but that hints at future pathways towards solving a lot of problems. The other is research that sort of escaped only yesterday and will be in the December issue of Current Biology, and that's from a team of Argentinian researchers. And what they discovered is the key role of certain people in getting a consensus when the world is very polarized. So if you have a community where half the people are very strongly against something, the other half are extremely for, how you bring them together. And apparently the people who are in the middle but extremely confident are the key players. See, you don't win over the other side by going for people on your side or trying to convert them. You aim for those guys in the middle. The actual concrete applications of this are something we still have to work on, but that highlights another possible pathway you could be considering if you're going to try and influence people to change things so that you get things done the way you want. So those are the things I wanted to introduce tonight. The next step is to then see how we can apply this. So I'd like you to think of your own challenges. I'll suggest a couple while you're thinking, so I'll give you a few minutes just to think. What are the impossible to do challenges? And be ambitious. What are the things you would like to fix? Would you like to, for example, eliminate deaths and injuries from traffic accidents? That could be done. It's not entirely impossible. It would be a big effort, but it could be done. There's really no reason why people should get killed driving their car into a light pole or something. That is so medieval. In the future, people will wonder, why did we let this happen? And we won't have an answer for that. That seems completely stupid. Then there was some research published, I think, in the end of August, arguing that one of the reasons why the insect population has collapsed is because our lights in the streets disturb the insects, among other things. Could we reduce the leakage of light from our cities? Could we make it so that we are a little bit darker space? Or could we eliminate completely internal combustion vehicles from the roads, have only electrics? These are all sort of big issues that could all be tackled, but I'd be more interested in hearing if somebody else has a different one. So has anybody thought of something while we were thinking?
About this? About this?
Yeah.
About this?
Yeah.
Something impossible or...
Anything impossible, some kind of goal, like abolishing slavery or abolishing, I don't know, the meat from animals or abolishing accidents in vehicles, any kind of high-level goal. Not. You can also apply the same methods to your own personal life goals and other smaller things, but it's more interesting, I think, to look at the top-level things, the really difficult challenges where there is no easy answer.
Yeah, I want a world without borders and without flags and without religious and things like that, to be one thing. That isn't my...
Does anybody else want that? Okay, then the first goal is you've got to get people to buy into your problem first.
Yeah.
We need something that is a broad support for, but it's still difficult. Did we have another example?
Climate change.
Stop climate change.
Okay, climate change. How do we fix that then? There is no big lever, climate change, yes, climate change, no. So how do we break that down to things we can do? What are the actual concrete things you can do? Let's brainstorm some ideas.
First thing you have to look at is the footprint
Yeah.
for each person.
Footprint. Any other ideas?
Any technology which is being developed should be sustainable.
Yeah. Another one?
Educate yourself about what actually gives you an impact and what doesn't.
How do you translate that into going out, not just yourself, but other people? What would that be?
Like educating others.
Yeah, that's probably, yeah, we had another.
I was going to say, for me, you can't solve the climate change problem without solving the current economic measurement model that we have, which is gross domestic production, which only measures production and obviously not consumption. Because
Yes.
to me, climate change is driven by consumption of whatever
Yeah.
that is, be that but resources.
This is something that you can really work on, because this is a very valuable insight that you have to work on the metrics sometimes. Like, for example, suppose you have a fire service. Let's suppose you measure them in terms of the number of fires they put out. Logically, the best strategy for them to get the biggest cash bonus at the end of every month would be for them to take a dumpster out the back, set fire to it, put it out, set fire to it, put it out. And if your house catches fire, they would just ignore it because it's too far. So you have to define things with the appropriate metric, and redefining things is actually very important. And this is something lobbyists understand that a lot of other people don't. Like, I've noticed very often you have maybe campaigners for something who are campaigning sort of honourably for the goals that they're aiming for. But on the other hand, you've got slimy lobbyists who are trying to work around it the other way. Like, for example, maybe you're campaigning against meat or something. So what then the campaigners do is they go to the government and they redefine the word meat. Like they redefined in the US, I think that chicken meat now can mean any part of a chicken, and also bits of pork and beef and other things as well. It's all legally chicken. And I remember once when I lived in Italy, somebody said, why do some things I buy say pure silk, some things say all silk, some things say only silk, and so on. There's a lot of different labels. And a consumer expert explained it. Okay, all silk means that everything in this piece is made of some kind of silk. Pure silk means that it's at least 90% silk, and so on. And there is nothing, though, that means 100% silk. And this surprised everybody, but they said, well, that's what happens when you let a lobbyist make the definitions. And this is what often happens, is you have a lobbyist who convinces the government to make a law which defines maybe vegetables to include pizza. That actually happened in the US. So you just redefined everything so that other people think they're getting what they want, when in fact they're not, because you've worked on the definitions. So working on metrics and definitions seems to be not so critical, but it actually is. And I think if you redefine what you mean by success, then people are going to go for that, because every time you have some kind of criteria for success, people do the thing that's being measured. this is, you see this, it's a common problem in companies, that people will only do the thing that's measured, even when it's obviously destructive. And you're thinking, oh, surely they'll see that this isn't a good idea, but no. As soon as you start measuring somebody on a certain thing, they're going to focus entirely on that. This is sort of common sense, and it's the same for governments. If you're holding your government to account based on certain metrics which are outdated and inadequate, then what happens is that they do the wrong things. We have to then have new metrics and measure people so that you can force them to behave in the right way. Okay, any other ideas for the climate crisis?
You need to stop to consume coal and oil and gas.
Yeah.
That must be-
How do you do that though? Let's break that down. We want to stop fossil fuel consumption. So we've got that as kind of mid-level goal. Concretely though, how do I do that? I can't go to the offices of the oil and coal company and say, you've got to stop. And they go, okay, that's never going to happen. There is no switch as well, oil off, coal off, and so on. That doesn't exist either. So concretely, how do we do that?
But then you work out, okay, who is financing new investment,
Yeah,
and then you realise I have a pension fund, and they're very large. So
Yes.
you personally take a step to ethically, divest from unethical
Yeah.
investments.
that's a very useful way of doing it. You go after the money. You just make it clear to people that if you want our money, you do things the way we say. So if you have oil and coal, we're not gonna give you money, and that hurts them. And people do move where the money is. I think we had to wait. Is it Deborah again?
We just put 57 solar panels on our roof, so giving people the opportunity to be self or contribute energy.
Yeah.
Be that through their solar panels and alternative energy sources.
There is also this, apart from the model of the stick, where you go and tell people, do what I say, or I hit you where the money is. That's one way of doing it, but there's also a thing called carrot mob, where if a business is doing something right, then they spread the word that everybody should buy from them. So if a company does divest completely, then you put the word out. Yeah.
Positive advertisement.
Yeah. So you had a point as well.
Also work on the people who actually give the permits for extraction of oil and minerals and
Yes.
so on, and that, and say, yeah, the governments can't produce any new permits or actually recall the permits that are existing.
You have to make it clear also that if you want to get elected, you've got to do these things right. And this is very, very critical.
Political
Which is
pressure.
why the slave abolitionists focused a lot on this letter writing stuff. So if you were a member of the parliament in later the 1700s, you would get big sackfuls of mail every day from ordinary voters complaining about what you'd done, and you would get the hint that, okay, when the elections come around, these people are all going to vote for somebody who doesn't support the slave trade. You have to make it clear. You hit them with the money, you hit them with the ethical thing doesn't really make such an impact, and also with the possibility of getting re-elected or being able to do what they want to do. But there's one other thing that we haven't touched on yet, and that is the public opinion. You're never going to get all of this to happen without having everybody behind you. And if you have the support of the majority, which you have in countries like Sweden, but not in countries like the United States, then it's a big advantage. When generally everybody is on your side, then it's a lot easier. When you have some opposition, then it's a lot more difficult. And if there's two sources of money for politicians, they can choose which side they want. If everybody is on the same side, it's different, which is why I think that the 1807 example is so interesting, is because they spent a long time building up the sort of popular idea that we need to abolish slavery, and then they were able to use that influence, that power, to make it happen. So they had a big campaign to get the hearts and minds of everybody. They had a massive campaign to convince people to adopt this new law, and it was in the end very popular, even though it actually hurt some people. Some people who were voting for this, they knew that that would impact their sales because they were actually involved in the business. All the boat owners in Bristol knew that they were getting hurt as well by that. There's still a lot of people who work there still voted against slavery, even if it's not in their own personal interest. So you do need to have a hearts and minds campaign, you do need to have public opinion. But at the same time, you need to be working on the lobbying, you need to be working on the money, you need to be working on the votes. And there's a lot of other stuff too as well, and I discovered this once when I was a speaker once at a conference about corporate social responsibility. And I met a lot of other interesting people that time, which is very, very enlightening. And one thing I discovered was the hidden connection often between the bad guys and the good guys. Now you would think that oil companies don't really have any connection with the anti-oil lobby, but my sources tell me that this is not actually the case. That what happens is they meet discreetly and they come to some kind of agreement, like where maybe nasty oil company says, okay, look, we will give in on that platform you want us to get rid of and say, okay, you win and scrap it and everything. If you will maybe take the pressure off our corporate building for a little while or something. So people think, okay, we achieve our goal, but they do this quietly because in public they are mortal enemies. In private they are negotiating stuff.
Same
And he
with
said that you
politics.
actually get more stuff by negotiating with the oil companies than you get by throwing stones at them. And a lot of the big victories for groups have apparently been done that way. And then I talked to somebody else who had a campaign against sweatshops in Asia. And he said that one of the problems is that companies don't have the know-how to fix these problems internally. So they go to a company and say, you must stop using cheap labor. And they go, how do we do that? So they say, well, we can help you with that. And they go, okay, cool. So what they do is these lobbying groups, they create, so like training in a box, all the know-how you need for your company to treat your suppliers more ethically. They give that as a present to the companies, which then deploy it and they improve a little bit. So you have in public, they're boycotting and campaigning and stuff, but behind the scenes, there's a lot of cooperation going on. They're trying to help them, and they maybe get better results through this back channel, through the front channel. And I'm sure as well that when that campaign was going in 1807, that some of the meetings in the corridors of Westminster, some of the meetings in the coffee shops were actually between the guys who owned the slave boats and the guys for the abolition, because the guy who's got the boat is probably thinking, eventually this is not going to work anymore. So I made a lot of money with the slave trade. So maybe they're saying, okay, look, tell us when you're going to do this, and then maybe I can by then have sold all my ships or pivoted to another business. So maybe they make some kind of deal that, okay, we'll let you have an easy win when you start stopping the boats. We will give in and say, okay, you guys win. But in reality, it was all agreed before, and they already had an alternative business already lined up, or they were planning on just selling the whole business and moving out. This I've never found any evidence of yet, but I have a horrible feeling that there was some kind of trading done, because every time you look into anything like this, you discover that there has been some kind of negotiating to one side or the other. Okay, let's try just one more example. We'll look at, there was the one we discussed a little bit before, the question of how could you reduce the light that leaks from our cities? This is from the story about what happened to all the insects, and one of the theories is that it's our lights that scare them away. Let's suppose for a moment that that is certainly true, and we all decide now we're going to be the Society for the Abolition of Light Leakage or whatever. We think of a snappy name for it later. What concrete steps could we do to advance that interest? How could we reduce the amount of light that's leaking from cities? Does anybody have any ideas how you could do that?
You could utilize motion sensing so that you only turn the lights on when people are there.
Yeah, you could have lights that are not on all the time, especially like on country roads where there's no traffic most of the time. You could have them so they come on and off again. That's one way of doing it technically.
Maybe investigate the frequency of that affects the light of the bugs. Like, is it
Yeah.
this brightness or is it this colour, and like all those kind of things.
Yeah.
Like, and see if there's a light that works that doesn't affect the insects.
Yeah, this is also very interesting because you need to do a bit more research, because it could be that it's just one kind of light they hate and all the other ones they like. So it could be that just by making a small adjustment can actually make a huge difference. There's been many cases like that. You had somebody else, Kathy?
You could install more like wilderness passageways along roadways so they actually have more habitat to live in.
Yeah, you could have kind of like dark tunnels, like they have sometimes tunnels and bridges over highways, so that the bugs can have at least paths so they're not trapped in small clumps of dark trees with light all around it, which maybe is what drives them crazy. Or at least they have the possibility to meet their neighbours and chat and everything, because maybe that's what gets them down.
In some cases they have, especially in roads, They have reflectors, and they don't use any lights.
Yeah.
As you pass by, your lights reflect,
Yeah.
and it is like light. It is not light.
Yeah, there is. I've seen a demonstration of this. They have light poles which are just reflectors. They're passive. And you're driving along with your lights on, and these poles light up and light the ground around it. As you pass, they're cheaper to run. So, I mean, it's easy to sell that to a municipality. You just say, how would you like light poles that don't use electricity? And they're going to be up for that because electricity costs money. So that's
So algae also produce
yeah,
light.
you could have a natural solution as well.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, in the case of when you've got self-driving cars, it doesn't need lights anyway because it can just whiz along in the dark using radar. So maybe you don't need to have everybody with bright lights on. Or if you are platooning vehicles in like a chain, which is what they plan to do in the future, only the first one needs to have lights. The rest can have the lights off, so you can reduce the light coming from highways at least. But the first question I'd be asking also is, where is the light coming from? Is it just regular street lights? Is it light from cars? Is it light from public buildings? What is actually the source that really annoys these insects? What is the main focus of our effort got to be? And also maybe we're lacking also a public awareness campaign, because so far all the campaigns I have seen have been from astronomers who say we should turn off all the street lights because we like looking at stars. And that is not very persuasive. So people think, what, you mean I should go around in dark streets through dangerous neighborhoods so that you can enjoy looking at the stars? Now that doesn't convince anybody. But if you say, look, if we don't turn the lights down a bit, the insects will say bye-bye, they will go away, like the dragons in How to Train Your Dragon, and we will be left without insects, which some people will be going, ooh, I hate them. But they actually do a lot of useful work, and we need them, and other things eat them, so we really want them back. And I've noticed that I'm puzzled as to why the decline has been so rapid when we've had lights in the streets for so long, which is curious, but I've noticed that in the last 10 years, when I used to drive down to our stuga in Småland, the front of the car would be covered in dead bugs. Now you stop to wipe the front, and there's nothing there, and I'm wondering, how did that happen so quickly? Have they just gotten better at avoiding roads? Or did they really all go because they don't like our lights? But it's another problem that could be solved, and I think that what we're often facing is a lack of understanding of the methods for addressing big problems, a lack also maybe of imagination, but I think very often people give up because they're thinking, this is a big problem, but it's too big for me, so I don't know what to do. So they just throw their hands in the air and say, is it possible? Which is a word I never want to hear, because nothing is impossible if you have the right resources. And then people always say, but laws of physics now you can't hide behind the laws of physics. If you had asked these guys in 1790 if you could get a letter from Europe to the colonies in North America in less than 3 weeks, they'd have said, no, that will never happen. Laws of physics, a boat cannot go that fast. And then we invented radio. So you have your idea that, okay, this will never happen. And then they fix it, just like in the beginning. Transatlantic telephone calls would often go through satellites, and there was a half-second echo all the time. It was really annoying. And then they put fibre optic cables under the ocean floor, and now you don't even notice a delay most of the time. So we can solve a lot of problems, including really difficult ones. But you have to think in terms of how you want to solve the problem, what the problem is, how you break it down, what the steps you take are, and also I think it helps if you both read the new research about group behavior, which is getting very, very interesting right now, and also look back at the classic campaigns, because what's always surprised me in teaching workshops about this stuff is that there's a lot of stuff that we sort of like think we invented, but they were already doing it at the time of Ross Poldark. Things like the kind of Kickstarter programs for making books, the idea of creating memes and spreading them, all the kind of stuff that we think we invented. They were actually doing this 200-300 years ago, probably a lot longer. And if you read stuff written by Roman politicians, you realize that a lot of campaign tricks were well known back in the days of ancient Rome. They were pretty advanced at that as well. They knew their politics, and they've written a lot of interesting guidebooks exactly about how you influence the population, how you influence the people who count, and things like that. So there's a lot of problems that today we dismiss as impossible, and they're not. They are doable. You might need an effort, you might need money, you might need everything. But certainly we should stop asking, can things be done? Because the answer actually is usually not meaningful, because it depends on what resources you have. If you say to me, could you do a whatever, And I would say, okay, with what I have in my bag right now, no. But give me a week, I could get the resources. Or give me a kind of Manhattan project or Apollo project budget, and I can do anything you want. You just give me that kind of resources, and then it gets easy. Then you're only limited by the provisioning side, and then it becomes a different kind of challenge, but it's still doable. Even if it means going over to Europe and knocking on people's doors and saying, come and work in my mine, because we need more coal to make more rails to make the train go to Sacramento. And we just have to do that. Now that brings us to the end of the challenge point for today. If you have any other challenges, we can discuss it later. And I wanted to give you a chance to ask a few questions if you want. While you're thinking of questions, I will though warn you that if you don't want to ask a question right now because you're too shy or because you're in a hurry, or if you think of a question next week, next year, then this little session comes with my standard lifetime guarantee, which means that if you can catch up with me later, you can always ask the question through email, through social media, or if you happen to drop by here at the hub, I'm often here in the mornings, because this is my co-working space too, so you're welcome to come and ask questions anytime, no problems, whatever. But does anybody have any questions right now before we finish? Yo.
I'm curious about, so the abolition of the slave trade, if I understood correctly, took about 20 years. So they did it in what, 1791? And
The
then
first law was in 1791, the second law was in 1807, yeah. It took about,
16 years.
it takes time sometimes.
Yeah.
But also I think they were developing their techniques.
Okay.
Once they'd understood how to do it, it went a lot quicker.
Okay. Because obviously some of the challenges that we face, we
Yeah.
don't have the luxury of solving in 16
No.
years.
But in those days, though, to send a message across the Atlantic would take months. So everything went a little bit slower. And I think there wasn't the same sense of urgency we have now. Now you can do things a lot more quickly with email, with social media, with flash mobs and things. I think we can do stuff a lot quicker. Plus, we have a lot more knowledge. They were often improvising things, and they were literally riding from town to town on a horse with a three-pointed hat, convincing people to write letters, which then had to be sent to Westminster, and everything took time. I think that you don't need to worry too much about the fact that that took a long time.
Okay.
What's interesting though is that they learned from their mistakes, they learned how to do it, and they succeeded in the end. But they had a very, very effective strategy. This idea that all we have to do is convince the 300 or so members of parliament, they pass one law, then we can send out the Navy and the Navy can stop all the ships. There was a lot of other things happening in the background, but that is the crucial element, and they got that right. And it's an inspiration, I think. Any more questions? We have one more at the back.
This way of thinking doesn't really imply doing things for good, necessarily. I mean,
You can, okay.
You use it. I mean, for instance, could you say that
Yes.
the introduction of slavery in the first place would be a solution to one of the wicked problems?
Oh yeah.
to begin with?
Every technique for persuading, influencing people can be used for evil as well as good. This is unfortunately what often happens. You can also get inspiration actually from campaigns in the past which have not been in the public interest. And this is what also rich people often do, with having the advantage of having unlimited budgets as well, which is one of the reasons why people should never have an unlimited budget. One crucial building block, I think, in a lot of strategies is stop the billionaires, and that's actually what they did in 1807. They had a policy of influencing the moderate members of parliament, but they also had to reform the parliament to get rid of those people who were paid and chosen by billionaires who would just do what they wanted. So part of the reason they succeeded was that they took away those members of parliament who were entirely hired and paid for by rich people. That's a thing actually which they actually did. This was included in one of the episodes of Ross Poldark, the TV show, where he's on the good side and they get rid of some of the bad members of parliament. That actually really happened in real life. And so it is actually important. And every time I see these evil billionaires on TV spending all their money to corrupt people, and I'm wondering why has nobody identified that as the big risk for a lot of things. Climate crisis, everything. Often have one enemy, and that's the people who have so much money they can do anything they like. Whereas the public, for us, to find $1 billion for a campaign is hard work. For them it's a lot easier. So I think that's one thing we have to fix. Anyway, I think that we are running out of time now, so we have one more
Just
question.
one question. So you think that the negotiating part, the negotiating with the so-called evil, okay, the opposite,
Yeah.
will be useful, like in our case, I think that the most important problem we have right now is climate change, and all around the climate change, because a lot of facts around climate change. But climate change is the most important. So do you think that it will be useful to negotiate a little bit with the so-called enemies, like the
Yes.
corporations and the polluters, the big polluters, and so on? So in a way to show them that they can have advantages even in the case they backstep.
Absolutely, you should have a dialogue with adversaries. You should at least be talking to them. And doing deals with adversaries is often a very effective strategy, though very often, though, it has to be done quietly. Because in public, maybe people are openly enemies. You see this often, like on TV, where people, when the cameras are running, they're mortal enemies and shouting abuse at each other. But maybe then you see them in private, chatting merrily, and it often happens that people on different sides do actually work together. This happens a lot in the insurance industry, where you have people who are supposed to be adversaries, but they're actually helping each other in certain ways, like trying to maybe push the problem onto somebody else. So maybe they have a shared interest in that. But yes, it is actually a very, very important part of getting your goals achieved, is to at least talk to the other people. That way at least you find out their ideas, what they want. And sometimes there is a middle way between the two different things, which means that you can solve the problem. And there's a lot of problems which could have been solved just by people talking a little bit more. Like, for example, there's one case where there is a tiny pub in Southampton, England called The Hobbit. And they got a letter once from lawyers representing the Soul Science Company in Hollywood. Now, this company owns all the rights to The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, and everything else. They acquired all that because they made a cartoon in the 1970s. They started making a cartoon version of The Lord of the Rings, so they bought from the Tolkien family all the rights, and they still own them. So when New Line Cinema makes their movies, they have to buy the rights from Soul Science. And if you call your pub The Hobbit, you have to pay them. Now, this pub is a very marginal business. It just breaks even. So they have no money to pay. So the lawyers said, okay, then we'll take the sign down then, or we'll come after you in court. Now, the problem here is that if they let them keep the name, they lose the legal rights to defend it. This is a basic fact of intellectual property law, so they have to do something. But on the other hand, it's not solving anybody's problem, but they just say, take the sign down, or we'll take you to court, because then everybody goes, oh, how terrible, there's this poor pub that everybody loves, and these horrible lawyers from Hollywood want to destroy it. But there is actually another solution where they just sit down together, and they'll say, look, we can fix the problem for you. If I was the lawyers working for the Soul Science Company, I would have said, look, we will find you a new name, we will buy you a new sign, we will reprint your menus for it, because that's cheaper to us than having to pay a lot of lawyers to chase after you. And really all they have to do is to send one letter to defend the trademark, but they could have fixed the problem another way. And then there's also a disadvantage if you are not cooperating with the enemies. Just, was it yesterday or the day before, Jake Burton Carpenter died, the pioneer of snowboarding. But did he actually invent the snowboard? No, he didn't. It was actually invented by somebody else whose name everybody forgets, because he would never let anybody use his name. The guy who invented the snowboard called it the Snurfer, or the Snurfboard. And when Jake Burton Carpenter decided to go into the business, he went to him and said, okay, I'm going to make these too, and I'm going to call them Snurfboards too. But the guy who invented it said, no, I take you to court. You cannot use the name. So he said, okay, I'll call it a snowboard. And then that name caught on because he let everybody use snowboard, whereas the original guy, who wouldn't let anybody use the name, he carried on using his Snurfboard name and gradually got marginalized and forgotten. Today, nobody remembers the story, nobody remembers him. So when Jake Burton Carpenter dies, everybody said the father of the snowboard is dead. And this guy's probably thinking, oh, I should have talked to that guy, I should have made a deal back in '68 or whatever it was, but he didn't. So having at least a dialogue with adversaries is a good idea. Making deals, also a very good idea, and it actually happens a lot more often than you think. Like, it used to puzzle me when I was a kid, how you would discover when some story came out that the police had been talking to some members of some bank robbing gang or something. And I thought, how did they even know them? But of course they do. The police know all the criminals, and all the criminals know all the police. Just like all the Western spies know all the Russian spies and vice versa. We don't know them, but they know each other. It's like a community. And they're often chatting together and maybe cooperating on projects and stuff. And very often one guy, or maybe somebody will do something bad like shooting a cop, and then the cops will ask their friendly robber gangs like, how about you tell us who did that, and then maybe we will not see you when you rob the next bank, and they go, okay, it's a deal. So I think there's a lot more negotiating goes on than we're actually aware of, because to be effective, a lot of it has to be very discreet. But at this point then, I think that we pretty much, if you have any more questions, you're welcome to come and talk to me later. I'll still be here, of course. I don't evaporate when the show's over. Or you can contact me through any of these channels, including also asking to connect if you want. Or you can come here in the daytime, during daylight hours, when you'll find me sitting here quietly minding my own business, and you're welcome to come and have a chat if you want. But for now, I just want to leave you again with what we started with, what Greta Thunberg said about the fact that we have to do something. You have to do the impossible, because giving up can never ever be an option. But now you know how to do the impossible. So that's all for today. Thank you.